Slipways is an unusual game that captures much of the feeling of a 4X game like Civilization or Master of Orion. However, unlike these games, it lacks combat and can be played in under an hour. I find the game to be engaging and endlessly replayable. Why does it work so well? In this video, I'll analyze its mechanics to understand how each one contributes to the overall game. I'm Ananda, and this is Practical Game Design. In most 4X games, you have multiple units, such as military units or workers, and you have locations, such as cities or planets. Each thing you control gets to act every turn. In Slipways, however, there are no units, and planets don't have independent actions. Instead, you directly intervene to colonize planets, link them together, or build structures in space. Each thing you do takes between 1 and 3 game months, you receive income every year, and after 25 years, the game ends. The choice to advance time with every player action solves the problem most 4X games have, that player turns bloat in the late game. If every unit and location gets its own action every turn, then as your empire expands, you will need more time to resolve your actions. But in Slipways, the number of things you can do per game year is independent of your empire size. As a result, turns in the late game don't bloat as much as is typical for the genre. By removing the need to check whether you have any actions remaining, Slipways also removes much of the irritating micromanagement common in 4X games. Of course, having time advance with each action would feel weird in a game like Civilization, where you have military units that can move about, since players assume that the units can move in parallel. Fortunately, there are no such units in Slipways, eliminating this potential source of thematic dissonance. The core gameplay of Slipways revolves around trade between its planets, which act as converters. Many games feature some form of converters, objects which consume some resources to produce others. But the converters in Slipways have a few unusual features. The most notable innovation is that most planets start off generating a resource even before you supply them. As a result, there are no sources that produce but do not consume. Every colony needs something, but is willing to offer an advance. Providing a resource up front means you can set up planets to supply each other and colonize planets before knowing whether you can meet their needs if you want the goods they provide. Eliminating pure sources also avoids giving players any obvious choices. Every world has a potential downside because you need to find a supplier for its needs. Another feature of converters in Slipways is that they are worth more points the more you use them, and you have to find markets for their products to upgrade to the next level and produce more goods. Every planet effectively generates a set of mini-goals. You need to find planets to supply them, and you need to find planets to accept what they produce. So you colonize new planets to meet the demand. But your new colonies have needs of their own, creating even more goals. Ultimately, every trade puzzle you solve creates several new puzzles in its place, leading to a sort of perpetual goal creation machine that keeps the player engaged and always with a clear understanding of what they want next. Every choice you make in Slipways is irreversible. There is an undo button, but that is just a convenience. There's no in-game way to remove a colony from a planet or destroy an inconveniently placed trade route. Every choice permanently changes the galaxy, and the consistency with which this principle applies establishes clear expectations for what is and is not possible. This permanency creates a strong feeling of progression to the game, whereas in a standard 4X game, you might struggle with a rival over disputed territory, with control going back and forth. This is another area where the peaceful nature of the game benefits its pacing. Slipways has something called the Galactic Council, where you choose 3 alien races out of 5 every game, and 2 of them give you a passive ability, or a perk. The aliens you choose also determine which technologies are available in the game, and give you broad objectives to achieve in exchange for resources and victory points. These council tasks nicely complement the mini-goals generated by each planet you colonize, since one is global in scope and the other is local. Council tasks help new players by telling them what to focus on when building their empire, reducing the decision space. This is a common tactic in board games where players get personal or hidden objective cards. However, the resources and opportunities provided by completing the tasks are also relevant to experienced players, and completing all tasks remains a challenge even at higher levels of play. At the end of the game, you score points according to a variety of goals and council tasks that change each game. You are awarded gold or platinum stars based on your score, which is a great way of visually communicating how well the player did. A number is difficult for the player to evaluate because they lack a reference point for whether the number is good or bad. But stars max out at 5 platinum and are much easier to parse than text. By providing a visual reward with a built-in scale, Slipways makes the player care a lot more about their score than they would if it was just an open-ended number. Along with the points you get for completing objectives, Slipways also has a mechanic called happiness, which acts as a multiplier for your score. In general, happiness increases when you satisfy the needs of your planets, and decreases when needs are unmet. If your happiness drops too low, you lose. One clever detail about how unmet needs work is that the amount of happiness you lose increases over time up to a maximum penalty of 8%. If you meet the needs of a planet before reaching 8%, all the unhappiness from that colony vanishes. But if you wait until after reaching 8%, a permanent 3% unhappiness remains forever. This allows players to make high-risk, high-reward plays with the possibility of avoiding consequences if they can fix their mistake in time, while still being somewhat forgiving if they fail. Another benefit of the happiness system is the asymmetry it introduces to the basic resources. All basic resources work the same way, but population also has the rule that each unused person reduces your happiness by 1% due to unemployment. This means that population-producing planets become subtly different than other planets, causing players to conceptualize them as more significant. By giving you a reason to care about one resource type slightly more than the others, Slipways helps players to prioritize which planets they should colonize, and which ones they should link. It also defines the identity of each resource based on how it relates to people. For example, food is always necessary to support populated planets, and likewise luxury goods are always necessary to upgrade them to successful. This gives each resource a unique identity, rather than just being interchangeable flavored currency. Science research in Slipways improves on research in other 4X games in several ways. First, it introduces a puzzle. Rather than merely building research-generating labs, Slipways requires that you also supply them with both scientists and multiples of a single resource type. The challenge is that getting multiple planets within range of the lab to produce the same resource is difficult if you also want to meet their needs, since they generally will not be able to supply each other as well. Researching with the same resource as another lab comes with a steep penalty, so you are also encouraged to diversify. The challenge of setting up efficient labs distinguishes research from money, whereas in many games you create science pretty much the same way you do money. That said, while Slipways makes the production of research feel less like money, spending research actually feels a little bit more like money than in other games. In most 4X games, the way research works is you choose a project first, and eventually generate enough science to complete it. But in Slipways, you generate science without having to specify a project first, and you can use this science to buy technology whenever you want, instantly. This allows for tactical research, where you wait until you need a technology and then buy it with your accumulated science. This allows technology to be very situational. There are a few technologies that benefit your entire empire, but most of them solve a very specific problem, such as allowing mineral planets to produce electronics, or letting you use robots as people. Rather than just a parallel progression track, technology becomes a toolbox that you can dig into to solve problems as they arise. This tactical technology dynamic is reinforced by the tech tier system. Each technology fits into a certain tier, and your tech level advances for every two that you research. Advancing your level opens up the next highest tier of available technology, but it also closes the lowest available tier to you. Thematically, your scientists have moved on to more interesting problems. This serves a few purposes. First, researching every technology is virtually impossible, which discourages completionism and enhances replayability, since players need to play again if they want to try out the technologies that they skipped. Second, this further reinforces the tactical nature of technology. You can't research everything, so you may want to make sure that the things you do research are as useful as possible. Third, from a balance perspective, this allows early game technology to be as useful as late game technology in certain circumstances, since players can't just take it all. Overall, the tech tree mechanics in Slipways are refreshing, and each technology feels unique and interesting. Slipways has an interesting twist on the common 4X mechanics of improving cities or planets that you control. Each colony may be improved with a planetary project, but you can only build one project per colony. Also, projects take no in-game time to complete. So, if you want to build machine interfacing on your wealthy Forge world to further boost its income, you can't also build a repurposing plant there to add a unit of luxury goods production. This contrasts with most 4X games, which let you build one of each improvement on each planet or city, and it is a massive improvement. When playing Civilization, you stop thinking about what improvements you're building after a while, and just keep building them until there are none left to build anymore, since there isn't really a big downside to any of them. It becomes a chore that has to be completed for each city that you own. But in Slipways, you only get one project per planet, so you have to think carefully about which one you want. It makes the choice of what to build on a planet matter, and it also eliminates the micromanagement you would otherwise need to do to make sure that all your colonies are up to date with the latest improvement that you unlocked. To the extent that I have criticisms of Slipways, they are pretty minor. One objection is that the unstable probe mechanic doesn't really fit with the rest of the game. When exploring, the circle that you will reveal pulses slowly, and depending on when you release the button, it might reveal a slightly larger or smaller area. This timing and dexterity element doesn't really fit with the pure strategy involved in the rest of the game. It is as though you are playing Risk and suddenly you have to play rock, paper, scissors before being allowed to invade Australia. It just isn't the sort of mechanic I would expect for this sort of game. The game does allow you to switch to a stable probe that doesn't pulse, but it still feels strange to include it at all. My other objection is to the administrative cost mechanics, and specifically how they escalate. You have to pay administrative costs for each of your planets, and the cost per planet increases according to the size of your empire. However, this increase happens in major steps when you exceed the maximum planet count for your current size. In practice, this means that you colonize one planet, and suddenly your net income drops by a massive amount. This drop feels quite jarring, and is very easy to miss, leaving you with the sudden realization that all your income has vanished. Ultimately, Slipways is a very well-polished game that makes some clever improvements to the 4X genre. Its most notable contribution is the way it eliminates micromanagement by removing units, limiting planetary projects, and changing the way turns work. Its trade system shows how powerful adding an element of progression to resource converters can be, and its tech tiers show how closing off options can be just as important as opening new ones.